welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha. So I thought I'd try something a little bit different today. I thought I'd try maybe the start of a new series of little mini reviews where I give my initial reaction to some famous films that I've never seen before. This might be a short series because in all honesty, there aren't that many famous films I don't think I haven't seen. That's not one to boast, but by famous films, I guess I really mean films that a lot of people have watched that I haven't. Uh, I'm thinking of doing one on Dirty Dancing because I think that's the big one for me. I'd say that's probably the most famous film, at least in popular culture, that everyone else has seen that known that I haven't personally, or at least not all the way through. So that might be an upcoming one. But today I thought I'd look at The Manchurian Candidate from 1962. Starring Frank Sinatra. I don't know, it's Frank Sinatra. And Janet Leigh, directed by John Frankenheimer. Never seen this film. This will be the first time I watched it. I don't really know a lot about it, other than I think it's like a political thriller. I think there is a remake with Denzel Washington. So I might do initial reactions to that as well, maybe tomorrow night. It's a poundingly suspenseful political thriller. It remains one of the best and brightest of modern American films. Major Bennett Marco, Frank Sinatra, and he'll say that Sergeant Raymond Shaw is a hero worthy of the Medal of Honor, but despite what he says, Marco suspects otherwise. A bizarre... And there the description runs out. I was really only spurred on to watch this because I watched Captain America Civil War the other day. And in that, Tony Stark refers to when he's got the Winter Soldier's got his gun trained on him, and he calls him the Manchurian Candidate. So, and Jonathan Demme I believe made the remake. So, I mean that's all the recommendation I need to watch that one. So yeah. Anyway, like I say, don't really know much about the Manchurian Candidate other than it's a political thriller from the US, made the year before Kennedy was assassinated. So I think that maybe bears some interest for me. So I'm going to watch it now, and I'm going to give you my initial reactions once I've seen it. Well, it's now 2 hours later. I just watched the film. Pretty good movie. So the plot, now I know, is Lawrence Harvey and Frank Sinatra. They're career war veterans. Whilst they were over in Korea, they were brainwashed by the Reds. Lawrence Harvey returns to the States, and he's basically been brainwashed into becoming a trained assassin. So somebody phones him up and says, "Would you like to play solitaire?" He goes into a trance, and then they essentially he's in a trance then, and then he's essentially there to do their bidding, and you don't find out until later on in the film who's behind it all. But there's quite a good reveal. There's quite a good twist. John Frankenheimer, yeah, he did a pretty good job directing. I mean, well, what's this now? 58 years old now, this film. Nearly 60 years old. So, I mean, obviously, by today's standards, you'd probably say this was a fairly slow moving movie. If you're not reasonably savvy with, how quickly thrillers were paced in different eras in the 60s and earlier, then you're not going to be on the edge of your seat. You've got to put your mind really into the mind of the 60s audience watching this at the time to really appreciate what an edge of the seat potboiler this is. But I still think it's a pretty entertaining film. Good performances throughout. Lawrence Harvey, he's not somebody I was familiar with before, but he sounds an interesting character. He died in 73. He died quite young. I think he's a British actor. He's most famous for Room at the Top. And interestingly enough, he was the father of Domino. If anyone remembers the Keira Knightley movie Domino, he was the father of the real life character. That the Domino character was based on the English public school girl who later became a bounty hunter. It's an interesting tidbit there. I'd say it's the British contingent that sticks out best in this cast, because Angela Lansbury's in this as well. I believe she might have won the Academy Award for this. If she didn't, she should have done, because it's an absolutely brilliant performance from Angela Lansbury. Who knew that she makes such a good villain? I think that the nicest people often do make the best villains. So she's pretty solid. But I'd say, and obviously like Frank Sinatra. His character was kind of a slow burn. He doesn't really have much to do in the first half an hour of the movie, and it becomes more and more his story, really, or well, he's really sort of the audience's point of view character. So you really see the story unfold through his eyes. So I guess that's the point of his character, and Sinatra did a fairly stand-up job. I'd say if there was any weak link in the cast, it was Janet Leigh, who I guess she was probably half doing Psycho at the time, but I mean she's she'll be the one that I'll forget was in the film. If I ever watch it again, I'm sure. I've got to cite out actually George Axelrod, who wrote the screenplay for this. George Axelrod wrote a really underrated 60s counterculture comedy that rivals the films like The Graduate and Harold and Maude for me, called Lord Love a Duck, starring Roddy McDowall, which is a really, really underrated satirical comedy. And although I'm a big fan of like comedies in disguise, and this film has a really, really witty script, and there's some good jokes in here. George Axelrod was first and foremost a satirist. He wrote for Billy Wilder a lot. He wrote The 7-Year Itch, and he wrote the adaptation of Breakfast at Tiffany's, which wasn't Billy Wilder. That was Blake Edwards. But so he was first and foremost a comedy writer, and I'd say the second act of this film is a comedy before it turns quite dark in the third act. There's some really funny moments in this. There's a bit where Angela Lansbury is discussing with her partner And he says, I need a number of how many communists there are in the committee, in the House committee. I need a number. Cuts to the next scene. There are 57 communists in the party. Just an arbitrary number that they've made up. There's another great speech about how there's two sorts of people in this world: those that come into the room and turn the television on, and those that come in and turn it off, and they usually marry. So yeah, it's replete with witty dialogue throughout. It's based on a book by Richard Condon, and this is the sort of film that could only be made in 1962. Really, it's it was the height of political tensions. Like I said before, it was 12 months before Kennedy was assassinated. The civil rights movements, Bobby Kennedy was going to be assassinated, Martin Luther King. So it was it must have been a very precedent film for the time. That's probably owes a lot to its longevity as well. And there's no, this is a Cold War thriller, and it deals very much with the threat of communism, but it also getting George Axelrod to write it, of course, gives it that satirical edge that the subject matter needs. I can imagine, because also you got to remember that the McCarthy hearings were going on in America at the time that this film was made, so that plays into it a lot. I think there's parallels that are drawn up in some scenes between what was going on with the McCarthy era witch hunts, which obviously everyone in Hollywood was getting persecuted at the time. I imagine George Axelrod had friends who were blacklisted in Hollywood because of the hearings, so you can very much see which side of the argument he falls down on in this screenplay. So yeah, I mean that was fun to do. That was the Manchurian Candidate from 1962 there, and I'm think if it's still on Netflix, I think I might do the 2004 Jonathan Demme Denzel Washington version tomorrow. That might be a nice little one to compare with this version and piggyback with that review. So there you go. That was fun. Those are just some initial thoughts on my first ever viewing of the Manchurian Candidates. Hope you enjoyed listening to them, folks. And until next time, I shall see you all out there in YouTube land.